Hello everybody! For this series of videos, I'm going to walk you through my process of rigging a model from start to finish and giving any tips I can think of along the way. For this video, we'll be setting up a model for rigging by creating meshes, setting up the texture atlas, and creating hierarchy. Any resources I talk about will be in the description of the videos. For this video, you can find images of the hierarchy for Pip, as well as for my current model, in the description for reference. So let's get started. So luckily, I already have a Pip 2.0 folder that I made. I recommend you do that if you're making a model. Make a folder for your model because you're going to want to save everything in this folder. Like save your model, export your model to that folder, etc. So I have a PNG for reference and the PSD file. So all you need to do is drag the PSD file into Live2D. And there you go. There is your model. And the first thing that I do, you can do this in any order. You could either begin setting up the hierarchy first, or you can set up the meshes first. I'm gonna set up the meshes so that I won't have to worry about them because it's not a pain, it's just this part's kind of tedious. So I just kind of go down the list. There's no particular order I do this. It's whatever order that was in my Photoshop file. As you can see, all of the files, it saves everything from your Photoshop file. So all the names and everything, so I don't have to rename anything. We're all good. We got the left and right. And yeah, so let's start creating the meshes. And for most of these, you're literally gonna be able to just go up here, go to the automatic mesh generator, click it, standard, and you're done. That's how you're gonna do most of them, except for the mouth and some others that you're gonna want to deform a lot. Standard. Oh yeah, you could also pick if you want fewer vertices, I think that's what it's called, or more. For things like clothing and stuff, I just do standard. And tassels, I'm just gonna go ahead and do the same thing. Even the shadow, everything gets vertices. I didn't talk about the shadows. I had these shadows set to multiply in Photoshop. That carries over in Live2D. So you don't have to worry about the shadows looking strange because you can use multiply works in Live2D. Woohoo! Continuing on. I'll do heavy for the teeth because I don't like it when the mesh goes far outside of where the lines are. I don't think it, especially for the teeth, it's not really gonna mess with anything, but it messes with me. I don't like it, so yeah. So we're doing it this way. And like I said, for the majority of these, you're not gonna have to do anything fancy. There are some tools that I'll show you, such as the deform path edit. I use this a lot, but right now we don't have to worry about it. It's the same deal with the lashes as it is with the upper and lower lips, so I'm gonna do those last. Except for the bottom lid, that's fine. We could just do auto. For the head, yeah, I'll just do standard for the head because it typically, I don't know if the program knows it's supposed to be the head or if it's because of the size of the object, but it usually puts a lot of vertices by default. And depending on what you want to do, you do want that so that it makes it easier to move the head left and right and up and down and all that jazz. But you're just gonna have to see what you'll need to do. And the good thing about Live2D is that if you ever decide like, oh, this isn't enough vertices, I don't like it like this, you can go in and you can change it basically at any time. It might mess up some of the parameters if you like had already started doing any of that. So it's a good idea to set that up beforehand, or if you need to change something, make sure you delete the head or whatever part from the parameters before you change the mesh on them. It's not always necessary though. Sometimes it doesn't mess anything up, so you're just gonna have to check. Just check and see. Okay, so now everything has their basic mesh except for the eyelids and the lips. So what I do for those is I edit the mesh manually, and I will show you how to do that. Okay, so here's where you go. It's right next to the automatic mesh generator. It's manual. And the very first thing I do is get rid of this box. You don't need it. And start going along the lid. Hold on. You want to kind of follow what you did on the other side. It does not have to be perfect. Again, like I said, you can always go back and edit it. It's not like there's no undo button. Yeah, and then what I do is I click on the brush over here, the one on the far right, and then I just go like that. And then add like a few more here and there if I feel like it needs it. So once I do that, I then use this handy dandy tool, the deform path edit, and I go along the edge here. And what this does is it makes it really easy to move the mesh in chunks, like this. And that's going to be essential for doing the eye blink. Okay, and then I am going to do that for the lower lash as well. Even though it's not going to need to move as much as the upper lash, I'm still going to do it this way. Give it a good old sweep. Okay, and then add a couple points. I'm just gonna do 3. And then for the lips, let me hide the scarf. Hello? Okay. So this is exactly the same deal. Just follow along. Except for the mouth, you're gonna want a lot of vertices. So what I do is I do one for the top because you don't need a ton for the flesh part, but you do need a lot for the mouth part. So I kind of go around, and if there's any big gaps, then I just add more. And there's no like right or wrong way to do this. You'll just have to see what works for you and what doesn't. Then I go along. And it's the same with this. There's no way you're supposed to rig the mouth, or there's no way you're supposed to put this art path thing. But see how it goes up here a little bit? I don't like that, so I'm gonna redo it. I'm going to add one more. So it'll be kind of like this, so that it plays a little more nicely. How many did I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A lot of this is basically just trial and error. So you set it up, and then you go to do it, and it doesn't work out well. And then you go, okay, what did how do I make it work? The last thing I'm gonna do is for the legs, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna add this, the art, what's it called? Deform path edit. I keep like calling it weird stuff, but it's called the deform path edit. So I'm gonna do that for the legs as well. And I'm putting the points where I want the leg to bend. So that way I can make the feet and legs move. Yeah, it just makes it easier to move, so I can go like up and down, like I could put Pip on the tippy toes and etc. But we're not worrying about that yet. I typically do the legs last, so I'm not going to be doing that for a while. But it's still good to set it up. So once you have all your mesh set up, you go into Edit Texture Atlas, and you set the size of it. I usually do 4,000, It's kind of overkill, but the reason I do this is because if I ever want to make new outfits, like everything can go on one texture atlas. So yeah, if you have Live2D Pro and you can do the 4000 option, then I recommend you do it. I don't know in what instances you would use the 8000 or the 16000. Maybe if you have, I don't know, like super beast computer or something, but I think 4000 is good enough. Click OK. And here is everything. And then you can do automatic layout, but sometimes be careful with the automatic layout because sometimes it will have meshes touching each other like this. If you have meshes touching, then you will start to see this like little floofy part in the eye white here, and that is no bueno. So you don't want that happening. So just make sure everything's not touching. You don't have to worry too much about making the layout super pretty. It's not really a big deal. Like I said, the only thing is just make sure that the meshes are not touching. It would be an issue if you had multiple outfits. Maybe it would make it harder for things to fit if everything was laid out sloppily, but if you just have like one outfit and everything fits just fine, then yeah, don't worry about it too much. Also, what I did here is I accidentally resized it a little. Try not to resize it because that can mess with the textures and make them look pixelated. So do your best not to do what I just did. And when you're done with that, you click OK and it will do its processing thing. And now we can set up the hierarchy. So the hierarchy is, it can be scary figuring out how to set everything up, especially since the hierarchy is so important. The good news about the hierarchy is that if you made a mistake, you can easily move things in and out of different deformers, so nothing's permanent. All right, so the way I do it is I like to start from the details and then go, basically you start with the trees and then you eventually make up the forest using those trees. I think it's easier that way and it fits with my workflow better. So you can try it either way you want, find out what works for you. But yeah, let's just get started. So I will start with I'll start with the eye. So I'm gonna take all the parts of the right eye, not the brow, those are separate, but take all these parts. I'm just hitting Control click to select them. And then you click on this button here, it's Create Warp Deformer. And you can name it whatever you want. I'm gonna call it IR Warp. Then you click Create. And you don't have to mess with any of the settings, like the number of divisions. You can if you want, but you don't have to. You can also change the size of the warp itself by clicking Control and dragging. I don't know why this decided to make it so big, but that's not necessary, so I'm making it a little bit smaller. Yeah, there we go. Now we have our first warp. Woohoo! And then same thing with the mouth. You can put it all in the same, that's the nose. You could put it all in the same warp, so just select all the mouth parts. Let's call it mouth warp. And the reason you want to make the deformers in the first place is because it lets you basically deform all of the parts at once. But let's say you're turning your head, your mouth is moving over here, and you need to distort the mouth to look like it's looking in that direction too. You could just move this warp deformer like so, instead of having to go in and change each part individually. And then within, you could do warp deformers within warp deformers. So within this, I could do ear floof. So now if I can move this whole thing individually, and then I could just move, or like together, and then I could just move the ear floof individually. And I could also warp it individually, but if I warp the ear, it's also gonna warp the floof. So if I just want like a little bit extra warp, I can use the ear floof warp instead of the ear warp. And if you notice, I'm doing all the face parts first, because then I'm gonna make them all into a face warp, and then I'm going to make the face warp part of the head warp. So you see, it's kind of like a bunch of little fish, and then they're progressively getting eaten by bigger fish, is how I would describe a hierarchy. Sorry, that sounds very like kindergarten, but that's the way I think of things, and it makes it like easier to process for me, is to think of it in simple ways. By the way, it doesn't matter if these are lowercase or uppercase. It's however you want to name it. It doesn't matter how you name it at all. Like the warp deformers, it's not important. It is important how you name the parameters, but luckily most of them that you'll need are already named for you. And then if there's any missing, like you can set it up in the program. But all the basic ones, like the angle XYZ has to do with your head, and then you have like the eyes and like body XYZ. So luckily you don't really have to mess with that. So I'm gonna do all the facial features, put them in their own warp, and call it face warp. And that's gonna make it easier for when I move the head left and right, because then I can just bring over the face. Ignore that other eye. That's because that's just the reference eye, and we'll be reflecting this eye once we rig it, so that we don't have to rig the eye twice. Okay, so face and head are almost done. The last thing is that you want to have a rotation deformer for the head. Just like that, except you want it to be centered. And a rotation deformer is different from a warp deformer in that you use it to rotate. So it goes rotation deformer and then warp deformer. So everything within this rotation deformer is going to rotate when I rotate. So that means that I'm gonna have to put the ears, the cheeks, and the face in this rotation deformer so that I can rotate the head as one piece for head rotates. So I take my face warp as well as the cheeks and the ears and put them all in. It's called head warp. I'm gonna change that to head rotate. Again, you can name it whatever you want. This is just like easy for me. There we go. And now it should, yeah, everything except for that eye reference, but we don't really have to worry about that. Yeah, now the head rotates. Woo! So as you can see, so we went from having all these individual parts into this head rotate deformer. So it's slowly but surely getting less intimidating and more consolidated, I guess is the right word. So let's continue on. Let's do the rest of the body. So I usually call the one for the body the torso warp. You can call it body warp, but I do that because you're gonna make a body X warp and a body Y warp and a body Z warp. So I use this to differentiate it. Oh yeah, and really quick, the hierarchy, don't worry about placing objects like above or below one another. It's not like layers like in Photoshop. You already have that hierarchy, like of what goes in front and what goes in back. You already have that set up in the parts section. So that's not something you're gonna have to keep in mind for the deformers. You could put things literally wherever you want in whatever order, and it's not gonna affect what is behind what for the deformer section. The arms don't get a warp. They don't deserve it. Just kidding. But what you do for these is you make rotation deformers for each shoulder. So here we have shoulder L, and then you take the right upper arm, shoulder R, and then you can place the forearms in their respective shoulder rotation deformer as well, so that when you move the rotation deformer, it's gonna move both arms. Whoop, 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 whoop. Rotation within a rotation. And for now it's gonna look weird because I haven't glued the parts together. But once I glue the parts together, hello, the upper arm will move with the lower arm. It's good to think about how you want your objects to move and decide whether you want a rotation deformer using the path tool or using a warp, because each one gives you different options. So feel free to try different things. Okay, and so now that we have all the main, all these main parts, we're gonna have to do the body X, Y, Z, and then the breath warp. So let's start with the breath warp. Let me take the torso. Like so. And I'm going to add the jacket warp into the breath warp. And the reason for that is when I set up the breath parameter, which is the model breathing, I want these parts to move, like I want the jacket to move too, to look like Pip is breathing. So let's add the scarf as well. So now the scarf will move too. Yeah, I think I want that. If I decide I don't, I can always take the scarf out of it. We'll see when we get there. All right, so we got the breath warp. Now we need to do body X. And I put the breath warp in body X. Not the neck because I rotate, like I do the neck itself. But yeah, body X, which is basically, as you can see, it's all of the torso and everything that goes in the torso. And then for body Y, let's go ahead and make that. And for body Y, I include the shoulders too, as well as the head and the neck. And the jacket. Basically, I include everything except for the legs in body Y. The legs are the only things that are like their own individual thing, and they get to move all on their own because they special. Yeah, it's not really a huge deal if the warp deformer isn't fully covering your object. But if you don't like it this way, like if it's not working for you, it's not a big deal for me because this is just the body Y. So I'm going to be focused on moving the body and not necessarily the head. So, but if it does bother you, like I said before, you just hit Control and then you can click and drag, and now it's covering everything. And then lastly, body Z. And now we have everything we need in deformers. And for body Z, I am going to go ahead and drag this. So I want it to move everything nicely. Like so. And now we have the hierarchy all set up. We might be moving things around later on, but this is just your basic. So you got your body Z, body Y, and then everything except for your legs. And then your body X focuses on the breath warp, which is like the torso and all the clothing that's on the torso. Yeah, there you go. I will take a screenshot of this, by the way. And for the YouTube video, I'll put this in the description of the YouTube video so you can go ahead and like download it and use this hierarchy as your reference. I'll also include the one I used for Seren. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I will do my best to answer. We will be going over eye blink, eye smile, and eyeball X and Y in the next video. So until then, take care of yourselves and I hope you have a cozy evening filled with stars. Bye!